I love this script. And I gave it to this guy to direct, and he just fucked it up, man. He turned it into something so bad. And I was like, all right, I've seen enough. I'm going to start directing these things. I don't know how to do it, but I'm just going to learn.
Hi everyone, this is Nihir, the host of Manor House podcast. Today we're joined by writer, director, and producer Adam Sigal, a filmmaker whose work spans surreal thrillers, dark comedies, and emotional layered character studies. His filmography includes Chariot, Neanderthal, and The Talking Mongoose, very hard to pronounce, The
Yes, it
Tower,
is.
and Skinamax, featuring actors like John Malkovich, Simon Pegg, Minnie Driver, Bella Thorne, and Paris Jackson, and more. Adam writes all of his material, often independently produces it, and directs with a singular vision shaped by an unusual former career, private investigator, which we're going to jump right into that because that's the most
Sure.
interesting background ever. And so today we're diving into his journey from PI to filmmaker and his obsession with emotion-first storytelling and what it really takes to bring unconventional stories to life in today's film landscape. So, Adam, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I thought you were going to say his journey from PI to filmmaker back to PI. I was like, oh yeah, the full journey, man. Like I'm
Are you back
retiring
to
early.
PI?
But no, no.
Okay. I
I
was
thought
like,
you
I
were
should watch
predicting
out.
it for me. I was like, oh shit. No, no, no. It's not at all. But yes, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, first of all, let's start with your private investigator background. I mean, I assume that shaped your approach to your characters and or writing in a lot of ways. So, can you take us
Yeah.
back to that time? What were you observing and how did it shape your understanding
Yeah.
of people and storytelling?
Yeah. I mean, so I was married, had a kid, and trying to make it as a filmmaker, it's a tough business. And I needed something that made money like consistently and could support my family. So I knew a guy who ran a PI firm, and I was like, all right, it's a day job. Let's do it. And I didn't really think too much into it. It was always temporary for me to be doing that while I tried to make it as a filmmaker. And it, it did shape a lot of my when I moved from Florida to Los Angeles, I was like 19 years old and I had no concept of life or anything. And I got this job pretty much right as soon as I moved out. And it was just really like an introduction to just how awful people are and just how awful the world is. And just like it really truly, because I would see movies and read books and stuff and hear about all this awful shit and be like, this can't be real. And then I'd see it firsthand and see how people were treating each other and lying and cheating and stealing. And I was like, oh, okay, like cool. Like I get it now. And it really gave me like, if anything, or if nothing else, it really gave me an extremely cynical outlook on life and human behavior, which helped me a lot with my characters, as far as like just making them more well-rounded and not just good. You know what I mean? Like understanding that there's always going to be more to a person than just sort of like he's a good guy, he's a bad guy. And so it was cool. And I mean, look, people always assumed that it was this really exciting career and like you're chasing people around town and you got a gun and you're smoking cigarettes and have a hat. It's nothing like that. It's a lot of sitting outside of people's houses, waiting for them to come out, and then some excitement chasing them around with hidden cameras and stuff like that. But it was mostly for like workers' comp fraud and people claiming that they were injured on the job, and there was some cheating and some civil and some celebrity stalking because this is LA. But yeah, I mean, it gave me a lot of time to think and it gave me a lot of time to write and read and sort of learn. So that, yeah, I mean, overall, like when I look back at it, like I was always going to need a side hustle no matter what. And like this was probably a lot more formative as an artist in a lot of ways than being a waiter or working a desk job in an office or something like that, you know?
You said, I believe also in one of your interviews, surveillance gave you a raw view into how people behave behind closed doors. Did this actually help you move through Hollywood and the industry more, even, not your characters, but the industry, how you deal with
Yeah,
people?
it did in some ways, mostly. my bullshit detector because I had to do lots and lots and lots of interviews with people about incidents where they were claiming that things happened. And I've started to become really good at picking up people who were lying. Like I became much better at sort of spotting like behaviors of people that were telling the truth or people that were BSing. And so, yes. And then also it kind of was funny because it created like everybody was interested in it, as far as like that's my career. And I would end up in these production meetings where I was talking to someone and I'm pitching a script or a project, and then they're like, "Oh yeah," and then I would like kind of casually mention, "Oh yes, I'm also a PI. That's my day job." I'm like, "Oh man, I want to talk about that. That's way more interesting than the industry," and it was funny because every meeting I would attend, almost somebody would say, "Okay, when are you going to do a movie about being a PI?" And I never wanted to because, I'm doing it. It's my day job. Like I fucking hate it. It's grind, right? And so finally, I told my partner, my surveillance partner, I said, "I will make a movie about this when I feel like I've seen everything there is to see as a PI." Everything. And this like unbelievably bizarre thing happened when I was doing as a PI on this case, the strangest thing imaginable. And it was literally for me, like, okay, I came home and I told my wife at the time, I was like, "I've seen it all. This is it. I'm going to retire." And she was like, "Are you crazy?" Like, and I was like, "No, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be as successful as a filmmaker. It's okay."
And what was that thing you saw?
Not to sound like a PI hipster, but people who are not a PI don't necessarily understand how unbelievable this is. But if you really think about it, you can. I had met this producer who will remain nameless and at a party. And he approached me as a producer and he was like, "Hey, like, I know you've got these projects and you've directed this movie or two, and I'd love to help you get your next one made." And I said, "Oh, great." And we kind of chatted. And so I had a director friend that I was working with at the time. I actually was just writing at the time. I wasn't directing. And I'd written the script and I had a director that I wanted to do it. And so we were on a three-way call with this producer. It was my director and I and this producer. And I walked into my office in East LA at the time. And this was like, this was 12, 13 years ago. And so we were actually still using like file folders. Like we had like manila folders and they had a sticker on them that had the name of the person you were doing surveillance on, the case number, a couple other things, the insurance company, whatever. And so I had a new case on my desk and I walked in and I was on the phone and the name was the producer. And he had this really unusual name. So it wasn't like John Smith, it was him. And I was on this call with him and my director. And I was like, I just went silent. Like I didn't even know what to say. And they were like, Adam, are you there yet? And I was like, "Oh yeah, sorry. And I had fucking gotten a case to investigate this producer and do surveillance on him. And look, the sheer number of people who live in Los Angeles and the sheer number of individuals who could potentially be committing insurance fraud that happens to be investigated, by my firm, that happens to land on my desk. It's unfathomable. It's beyond coincidence. It's absurd. Like the most insane thing that's ever happened to me. And that was it. And I said, that's it. I've seen it all.
No, that is insane, and I want to see this movie. So when are you making it?
Yeah, I already made it. I did. So I made my second movie was called Sargasso, and it was with Tom Berenger and Jeremy Sumpter. So that was the other funny thing, though, was that so once people were like, "Oh, you got to write a movie about being a PI," I said, "Okay." And I did. And I think that they all expected that it was going to be this like action sort of thing. And it wasn't. I mean, being a PI is deeply depressing because you're seeing, you're seeing the massive flaws in the insurance industry in California, especially. And just like, you have like this culture of insurance fraud with, poor warehouse workers. And then, you get hired to go investigate them and you're busting them and this guy was lying. But then you're realizing these are just poor people who have no way to pay for medical insurance or anything like that. And so it's kind of like nobody wins. And that was one of the themes in my movie was nobody wins. The guy makes a joke at one point. He's like, "That should be our company's slogan. Nobody wins." And so I wrote this script called Sargasso, and it was about a young PI or a young kid who gets hired as a PI, takes this job, and then he's kind of mentored by this older PI, which was played by Tom Berenger. And both of them were like the two sides of me at the time. Like there was like the like sort of hope, youthful optimism of being a PI of like I'm doing a great job and I'm busting bad guys and making things right. And then the older jaded guy who knows that it's all bullshit and this is just insurance companies trying to save an extra buck here and there. And so I portrayed both sides of that. And I love that movie. I was very proud of it. It was Jeremy Sumpter, Tom Berenger, Graham McTavish, a couple other people. It was a cool cast, and I really loved how that movie turned out. And it was tiny, and it was a nightmare to make, and we ran out of money like 5 times, and it was a shit show. But it's it's out there.
And sounds very timely, honestly, with what's been happening, with this specific incident and all of that.
Yeah,
Sounds very
that's
timely.
true.
But on another note, I think your investigation process, the isolation should be very similar to your writing process, right? Because
Yeah,
before directing and producer, you were producing, you were a writer in the first place, which
yes,
is also a very interesting story how you got into that, that you started writing your
yeah.
own material. So we can
I'm
explore that too.
always honestly like I never really cared that much about directing initially. I was always a writer. I've been obsessed with reading since I was a kid, and I read every novel and every science fiction, and I wrote my first novel when I was like 16, and it was terrible, but it was like a sci-fi novel, and that was all I wanted to do. And I started when I moved to LA, I wanted to tell stories and I loved movies, but I had never really, I wanted to be a novelist, honestly. Like that was what my intention was in life. And then I was dating this girl right away when I moved out here who was an actress, and she would bring home her audition sides, and they were so bad. And I'd read these things and just be like, kidding me? Like I could write better this in my sleep. So I would spruce them up for her and I would fix them to make them tolerable. And she would bring them back and she'd be like, oh, they loved the changes that I made. And I was like, yeah, I know. That's because I'm probably a better writer than these people writing these godforsaken scripts. And so finally, after a bit, I was like, I'm going to fucking write a script. This thing seems so easy, like like writing a novel is so hard. Writing a script is easy. So I wrote this script called Daydreamer, and this was like 2005 or six. And so I wrote this script, and my roommate was an aspiring director, and I had this script, and I gave it to my roommate, and he's like, I love this dude. I want to direct it. And I was like, okay, what do we do? He's like, I don't know. So I had this kid that I played football with in high school. His dad I knew was kind of rich, and I went to a barbecue at his house, and I said, hey man, I got this script. You want to make a movie? And he was like, sure. And he said, how much is it? And I had no idea. I was like, 250,000. And he's like, okay. And he cut me a check. I didn't even have really my own checking account at the time. I was like, still had one that I like shared with my dad. And I was like, okay. Then I had this check and I brought it home to my roommate, and I was like, all right, let's make a movie. He's like, okay. And we got a consultant to help us kind of put it together. And then this kid came in to audition for the lead who I had never heard of. My roommate kind of knew him, and he's like, he's weird, but I think he's kind of good. And his name was Aaron Paul, and we cast him. He was the lead, and this was like pre-Breaking Bad, and so we made that. And I didn't really like how it turned out. I just was not happy with it. So then I wrote this other script that was incredible. It's called A Voice in the Dark. I love this script. And I gave it to this guy to direct, and he just fucked it up, man. He turned it into something so bad. And I was like, all right, I've seen enough. I'm going to start directing these things. I don't know how to do it, but I'm just going to learn. And so then I wrote another script called The Two Dogs, which again was such a great script. And I raised like 75,000 bucks or something like that. And I shot it all in one location. It never got finished. It never got released, but I learned about directing. And then really my first movie, real movie, quote unquote, was I wrote this script called When the Starlight Ends. And it was just this very kind of like sci-fi romance. And I had this actor friend named Sam Hewen, and he really loved me. He loved my script and he really wanted to make it. And I was like, had become familiar now with this concept that you need big stars to make movies. I hadn't thought about this before. So I had a manager and he was like, yeah, man, you got to find a star to make your movie. And I said, okay. And I said, there's this guy, Sam Hewen, that wants to do it. And he's like, I don't know who that is. He doesn't matter. I said, okay. And then one day, Sam DM'd me on Facebook. So in the Facebook days, and he said, hey, I booked this show. I'm the lead on this show. And people say this all the time. They're like, I'm on this massive show and it's going to be huge. And it's like some fucking web series nobody's ever heard of. I'm like, okay. But then I started seeing a lot of people posting Sam. And I was like, what is this? And so he's the lead on this show called Outlander. And I was like, oh yeah, I've heard of these books. This is going to be a big show. And so I go to the premiere. He brings me to the premiere of Outlander season 1 at Comic-Con. And there's just thousands and thousands of just middle-aged women who are obsessed with this show and this man. And I go to my manager and I'm like, dude, I think this guy actually could be a star. And so we end up able to get the movie financed with him. And that was really my first directing experience. And that I could do an entire podcast about what a nightmare that was. It was its own thing because the movie was financed by Dr. Oz of all people because his daughter
Really?
played the lead in it. Yeah, but that was a
He's
shit show. But
Turkish,
anyway,
by
yeah,
the way.
Dr. Oz,
Yeah.
he's an interesting guy. He's a
Yeah.
very interesting guy. Basically his daughter was my lead opposite Sam, and his brother-in-law is actually a pretty well-known producer and investor. And he ended up being the one that actually like financed it. And it was an experience dealing with people like that. These are obviously some big people. And it was not great, the experience, but I learned a lot about it from that. So
That's the interesting side though, because a lot of people go and watch movies, obviously, but there's so much that goes into it. And especially you started your career as a writer, right? And you need a pen and a paper, and you yourself make your artwork happen. But when it comes to film, you need a lot of different elements. It's not just you. You need the financing, you need the legal knowledge or the support, and of course, like you're putting this together, you need your team members and your actors. So it's a lot of moving parts and it's very challenging to make a movie happen. So definitely I think we're interested in hearing more about like some of the key things you learned during that experience.
yeah, I mean that part, making movies and getting movies greenlit, that it has also changed quite a bit, like how to do it. And I have made and financed 6 movies, and it's always different with each one. And it does get a little bit easier after you've done a few of them, but it really just takes like a tremendous amount of time and belief in your own ability and sales, like being able to sell yourself and sell the project. And, you know, it helps if you have like even like a rudimentary understanding of the business side of the film industry, which I do. And that part is immensely complicated, but you can kind of learn it. And so if you have a good sales pitch and a good understanding of the business side so that they know that you know what you're talking about and can give them realistic expectations that they can kind of, that don't like trigger any red flags for them. Because most of the people that you're going to, they're going to fall into one of two categories. They're either experienced film investors, which it's pretty simple. Like they know what they're looking for. And if you have it, great. Or it's people outside the industry who have no idea what investing in film is. And they're just rich and they're successful in some other business, usually. Right. And those are the ones that I've honestly invested a lot in my movies up to this point. I've also had traditional film investors and lenders and stuff like that. But a lot of my guys have been just like rich people that were outside the industry. And that just takes a lot of explaining because in the end, like the investment process is similar to other industries, but also incredibly different and has some really unique qualities that you can capitalize on to get people interested in investing in film.
What a lot of filmmakers struggle is the sales part because a lot of them are artists or just interested in the work, and not necessarily being in the spotlight or selling
Yeah.
themselves. So what's your advice on that?
Yeah, that suck it up, dude. I would love it if people just came to me and showed up at my door and they were like, "Hey, what do you got? What's next? What are you doing?" That's not how it works. Like you have to be putting yourself out there all the fucking time. And so you have to have an almost irrational love for your own work. And like I've adopted a mentality of like unbelievably like pretentious snobbery where like I think that anybody who doesn't like my work has bad taste. Like straight up. Like if you think don't like my script, it's your problem. Like you actually have bad taste and are probably like a Philistine, right? And that attitude has carried me very far. The biggest mistake that a lot of investors make when they come into the film industry from other industries is approaching it exactly the way they do other industries. Because the one thing that is unquantifiable in film and is so mystifying, and it's why so many investors come into film with a very business-like and analytical approach that's very cultivated by whatever other industry they're in, and then they eat shit and they lose money. And they're like, I don't fucking understand. They're like, okay, hold on. They're like, Jake Gyllenhaal made this movie 2 years ago and he plays a soldier and the movie made $250 million. I got this Jake Gyllenhaal soldier movie that I made with the same DP and I can't sell it. Well, what's the problem? Why? I don't understand. They made a similar thing. If I go buy a building, if I'm a commercial real estate person and I go buy a building in this neighborhood and then I buy another one in that neighborhood, they're both doing well. I don't understand. That's the
Yeah.
problem because you don't have any taste in art and you're a fucking imbecile and you don't, and you think you do. And you think that you can parlay your analytical approach into art and you can't. And that's why the most successful producers and investors are the ones who have good taste. And I mean, not to bring about the name of the devil, but somebody like Harvey Weinstein, setting aside all his bullshit, very few people could spot talent like he could and could spot a good script and a talented person and understand the artistic value of a project and knew to back it. And that is what very few people have on the producing and the investing side. And so that's the part that I try to explain to them and get them to see is like, okay, look, like this is the unquantifiable aspect that will be the difference between whether it's financial, whether every single one is going to be a massive, gigantic financial success. No, but at the very least, like you're going to make something that is good quality, you can be proud of, will at least break even, and you can go to a premiere and see it and be happy that you were a part of it and you've made something great.
And there are also a lot of different elements, like when you're releasing it, what other movies are being released, or I don't know,
100%.
and the timing of things.
Absolutely. No question. Yeah. I mean, and those are, you know, higher level studio questions usually, but in the independent world, you know, you're really looking at just quality and just trying to get into festivals and make something that people like and that appeals to people because you don't have the big studio marketing system. You have to kind of do it via word of mouth through festivals and through just kind of like banging the drum for your own projects.
And you're not part of the traditional studio system, but you're still attracting major talent. And so, what's
Sure.
your approach to getting projects off the ground?
Yeah, I mean, that's another part that helps through time and having worked with it's kind of a domino thing of once you've worked with a few bigger sort of actors, then other ones start to trust you, at least that you're not a lunatic, especially if those actors speak well of you. But, you know, it's a really tricky sort of needle that you have to thread on that between like the financial aspect of it. So on independent films, there is a giant swath of the industry that you're never gonna get because these are like guys and men and women who are working a lot within the studio system, and so they're just getting paid so much that there's just no way. Like they're only going to do an independent film under very specific circumstances where they're really good friends with the director, or it's not a true independent film, like it's A24 or whatever. Like you can call it an indie, but it's not, and there's real big money involved. So you have to find somebody who either does enough as an actor who does enough films and they're more of like a quantity over quality person, or they have done a couple of massive movies and have so much money that they can do whatever they want, or somebody who needs money at that time, right? They're going through a divorce or whatever, who knows, and they need money. And so once you've got that isolated as far as like the actors that you can actually realistically get, then it's about getting through the barrier of the agents, which is another entire thing that comes about through networking and luck, and a lot of like just kind of persistence and trial and error. And it honestly that it varies a lot from actor to actor and project to project. Like the John Malkovich was the first, I would say, like big A-list actor that I worked with. I mean, I'd worked with Sam and I'd worked with Tom Berenger and stuff like that. But John was the biggest guy at the time. And that was through personal connection. It was through like a neighbor who she was like, I know John Malkovich. And I didn't believe her. And she's like, what's your script? And I said, it's this weird sci-fi thing. You want to send it to him? She's like, sure. And she sends it to him. And then he responds to the email and he's like, this is the best script I've seen in years. I want to do it. And I was like being catfished. I was like, uh-huh. And then I got on a Zoom and there he was. And he's like, Adam, this script is magnificent. I love it. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Okay. And so that was like its own thing, like through a personal connection. And then with Simon Pegg, the Simon Pegg thing was so bizarre because you get so accustomed as a filmmaker to just being beaten down by the offer process. It's like, okay, I've made movies. People know at least part who I am. They know my movie's going to get made. I got this confidence. Now I'm going out and I'm making offers and the agents are just ignoring. They're just like, we don't even give a shit. So you play that game for a year and you're just like, why am I bothering? And then we send an offer to Simon Pegg. A week later, his agent's like, oh yeah, he likes the script. He wants to meet with Adam. I'm like, okay, I meet with them. He's like, yeah, sure, I'm in. It was such an easy, smooth process. And my theory about it is that he's fucking British because the Brits and Europeans to another extent, they just approach acting differently. The agents and the actors themselves, they look at the art side of it more than just the like sort of like prestige fame aspect that I think a lot of American actors and actresses pursue. And they're like, oh, like this guy won Sundance. I want to only do movies with him. Like they know, like a Brit read the script. They're like, this is dope. I want to do this. I want to play this character, and they don't care. Like they don't care as much about like all the other bullshit that is involved with getting a big star to do a small movie. And so I think that was why the thing with Simon was so smooth. It was simple for him. He's like, I like the script. Cool. The director's cool. Yeah, I'm in. Let's do it. That was it. And it was amazing.
Yeah.
He was a great guy. So
Yeah, and you work with so many heavy hitters, again, Simon Pegg, John Malkovich, Bella Thorne, and more. And do you now write roles with specific actors in mind, or um,
never, never, never. I write stories. The only time I've done it is actually now because I'm writing a script with Malkovich. We had this concept he wanted me to write. And so I am writing this one, but also he's fucking John Malkovich. I mean, he's like my favorite actor. So he's one of the few that I'm like, okay, I'm going to write something for this man because I want to do another movie with him. But in general, no, I come up with a story, write it, and then the actors are completely random. And I catch a lot of grief for it, to be honest, from friends and partners. And, they're like, why aren't you writing roles for me? I'm like, I don't write roles for anybody. I got to fucking write scripts.
yeah, and your writing process was also very interesting. I think in one of the podcasts, you talked about outlining in blocks and letting stories unfold over
Yeah,
the years. That also reminds me, like David Lynch a little bit,
sure.
sitting on ideas and letting
Yeah,
the subconscious appear. Is that part of your process
yeah,
as a David Lynch fan, or?
100%.
Mhm.
That's the process. I think about a story for years and for decades sometimes. And I just think about it and little bits of it come to me. Like little bits of it will kind of like materialize out of the ether. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. Oh, interesting. And what I find happens so often with me, and I don't know if this is like why this happens or what it is, but almost always I'll have two ideas and they're like totally unrelated and they're like over years and years and years and little bits of them are kind of like coming to me and like, okay. And I make notes and I have like a blank script document where I'm kind of just like putting it in and then I combine them. And I'm like, oh my God, these were the same story. I never saw it before, but that's what this was. And that's when it like really fucking turns into something. And then I've got this script file that's got 10 pages of just like block sort of like stream of consciousness outline. And then I just start writing it. And then it's pretty easy because I know where I'm going and I know like where the next few scenes should go and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, for instance, like that's what happened with Nandor, which is one of my favorite scripts that I've written, where it's like I heard about this story about this family in the Isle of Man who believed that there was a talking mongoose that lived in their walls. And this was a true story in like the 1930s. And I heard about this and I was like, what the fuck? And then I heard that this like parapsychologist named Nandor Fodor had gone out to investigate it. And I was just like, this is the strangest thing I've ever heard. I'm going to write a script about this someday. And it was 7, 8 years of just like always, anytime I would talk to somebody, they'd say, what do you think you're going to do? And I'd say, I'm going to do this talking mongoose script at some point. It's going to happen. But it wasn't until I had this very bizarre sort of religious experience. And I don't mean like a religious experience to me, but like my interactions with some very religious people that I felt were making some really bizarre decisions in their life based on their religion that were harming a lot of people. And I was looking at this and just being like, man, like these people are prioritizing their belief in something that is a fucking nonsense and it's hurting a lot of people. And then I was like, but this is so common. Like people place their religion so high in their lives above many other things in their happiness and money and relationships and all this I would never date a guy if he's not a Christian, but like so much shit that I was just like, I think it built up over time. And then randomly I was like, oh my God, this relates to this talking mongoose. And it doesn't at all, but in my mind it did. And I was like, okay. And then it became this sort of like allegory about my own relationship with religion and sort of like cynicism, which is where I find myself, and then faith, which is where I know a lot of people who are there, and the relationship between those two extremes and happiness and how they relate to one's happiness. And that was the core of this talking mongoose script. And so again, like back to the writing process, like that's what happens. Like I will like, Skinamax, the one that I just shot, a similar thing. It's like I wanted to write something that encapsulated my 20 years long frustration with the difficulty of maintaining one's artistic integrity in the film industry and just how hard it is to keep your artistic soul and not completely have to fucking sacrifice it. And my fascination with these 90s pornos that I grew up with when I was, I'm 42 and you're a young baby. I think I just saw you're turning 26 or something like that. So you're
27.
27. So before your time, back in the day, porno was very different than it is now. And these were real movies. These were these movies where they had real budgets and they were shot on film and they had real directors and sometimes real actors. And then they just happened to have, boobs and butts in these things. And they wouldn't even barely be a PG-13 movie these days, but these were what we had. We didn't have the internet at this time. And I was fascinated by these because some of them were actually like decent movies, And so again, I like always wanted to write a script in that world of these like softcore 90s pornos. And then I was like, fuck, this is it. This is perfect. This is the way I can channel my own frustration with the industry in this. And so I wrote this script about this guy who is an indie filmmaker like myself, whose career kind of falls apart. and he's very frustrated, and he ends up with no other opportunity than to direct one of these softcore pornos. And so, again, like that's kind of my process. Like it just takes a bunch of time and then coalesces into something. So,
And what are some of the biggest sacrifices you had to make to maintain your artistic integrity?
oh God, to get too personal, I got divorced about 7 or 8 years ago, and it wasn't, it was in no small part due to my maniacal desire to make movies and be a successful filmmaker. I find that it's incredibly difficult to maintain focus with all the other shit that you deal with in your life enough to like truly be a writer and director. And I know some people can do it and balance all these different aspects of their life. And I've done it and I have to do it to some extent, but like I at some point realized I wasn't doing it and I was failing, and I, you know, sacrificed the traditional family model, I think, that is accepted in today's society. And I'm a divorced man now who has a very amicable relationship with his ex-wife and kids, but you know, they don't live with me. And it's like I'm here by myself because I can write and direct and create, and I've become just like a vessel for making movies at this point. That's kind of my life.
And also, again, going back to the conversation, filmmaking is a collective endeavor, and then you have all of these different creatives come in the picture, and you're making this together. So I guess that's the challenge as well, right? As a director
Yeah.
to have all these voices around, and of course, respecting everybody's expertise and
Yeah.
talent, but
Yeah. I mean, I
or
think
from an
that's,
investor point of view, maybe. I don't know. Have you ever been in a situation where for an investor or for different purposes you had to give up on some of your artistic
oh yeah, of
um
course. Yeah. I mean, it's two very, very different questions. So a film is a collection of artists who come together to make something, right? The only things that I know how to do are write great scripts, and I have a dim vision of what I want it to look like and how I think it should go. I rely on artists who are much better than me at their own craft to accomplish that vision. So my biggest job on any film is really just to explain what I want and explain what I'm trying to do, and then let that be interpreted by artists. Because like, especially on the acting side, right? Like, okay, I've got this scene and I want to convey this particular emotion in it. And this is the subtext, and this is what I'm trying to say, and this is the thematic sort of vision for this scene. I'm not going to tell John Malkovich how to do that. I'm not going to tell him how to act. I'm not going to tell Simon Pegg or Minnie Driver how to act. Like they know more about acting than I'll ever know. And so, or my DP, I'm not going to tell her how to light a scene. What I'm going to do is say, okay, this is what's happening in the story at this point, obviously. Is there anything we can do from a cinematographic, that's not a word, but perspective, or an acting perspective, that could help to achieve that? And then I let them do that. And production design, anything, like all of the department heads and all of these costume, makeup, whatever, all these great artists. So it is a collaborative endeavor. Now, to the second aspect of your question, you know, when people come over from other industries and put a lot of money into movies, they often believe that their expertise in this other industry qualifies them to understand what it means to make a good movie or to do something in a movie. And it doesn't. But you get people who are like, look, I watch movies all the time, so I think that you should change this scene to this. And it's like, okay. And yes, like sometimes you do have to compromise a bit for the money, but I fight, man. And I'm very manipulative too. I'll fucking gaslight the shit out of them and just be like, oh no, like, look, like, and I'll just lie about why I feel a scene should be a certain way, but I'll lie in a way that like sounds very convincing and intelligent to where they feel like they're being like artistic in doing it, when really like I just think my way is better and I don't want to change it because I think their way sucks. But that's fucking life, Like there's the story of like, Miyazaki, like one of my favorite stories was when Harvey Weinstein was like trying to change one of his scenes in Princess Mononoke. And Miyazaki sent this long thing about how the scene was an homage to his father and these trips that they used to do. And Harvey said, okay, look, family's the most important thing, so we won't change that. And I was like, it was all bullshit. He's like, I heard nothing. That was not all of it was a lie. So you do what you got to do to maintain as much as you can. So.
I guess a different way to ask this question is also you are drawn to some of these surreal themes that may not necessarily be like blockbuster themes. And have you ever felt pressure to make your work more commercial or formulaic and or what
Yeah.
helps you resist that and stay
Oh yeah. I mean, I
authentic to
would
your voice?
I would be probably a huge director if I went the formulaic route and did the shit that I know that people want to see, but I just have no interest in it. The artists that I admire the most are the ones who did their own thing and who did things that are not what you typically see. And my deepest admiration has always been for artists who could portray or tell stories in a way that's unusual, and who, like there's two ways you can tell a story. Like a man walks out of his house in the morning and walks to his car and drives to work, right? Okay, cool. So there's the prose way of doing that, right? Where it's literally, okay, cool. Hey, a man walks out of his house, he gets in his car, he drives to work. I'm going to show this in a movie. I'm gonna shoot it. Okay, here's wide shot house. Man exits over the shoulder, gets in car door closed, drives away. Or I'm fucking showing a man walking out and it's hell and there's demons and devils and shit. Like there's a poetic way to show things as well. And that's much more interesting to me because I've fucking seen it all. Like I don't need to see another gangster movie or another horror movie or another dinosaur movie. I don't care. Like, unless you're showing it to me in a way that I haven't seen before, I just have no interest at all. And so, as an artist as well, it's the same for me. Like, I'm not like I remember, like, and again, it's not. I'm not advocating for it as a way to be an artist because it's not a way that leads to you becoming the richest or the quickest or the most successful overnight. It's not. But I remember when we did the premiere of Nandor in LA a couple of years ago, the 2 or 3 nights before I went to a movie and I saw a big blockbuster. I don't remember what it was. I think it's like Oppenheimer or something like that. And there was these trailers for the movie and they were all just like big movies, action and sci-fi, and I'm like sitting here like, okay, I got this premiere of my Talking Mongoose movie in a couple of nights. Like, oh my God. And so the first thing I said when I introduced Nandor, which luckily people laughed at, was I said, all right, I know what you all are thinking, here tonight, like, oh, another talking mongoose movie, like, because obviously I was kidding, like, nobody's fucking done this. And I realized that it was probably not the most commercial concept, but I don't know, so just don't give a shit.
When the credits roll, what do you hope audience walks away feeling in your movie?
I don't care what they feel. I just want them to think. That's all. I just want to make them think about concepts or ideas or things that they don't necessarily think about normally. I'm not trying to scare anyone or make them cry or make them feel happy, or I don't care about that. I want them to see something and at least consider things about life and the universe that they haven't thought about before. That's it.
I love that. Well, Adam,
Yeah,
thank you so much for joining us and
of
sharing your
course.
story and your workflow and process with us. This conversation was a rare look into the mind of a filmmaker. Thank you so much for that. And
Anytime.
anything
Of
else that we
course.
should keep an eye? Any
No,
project?
once Skinamax is done, it'll come out and I will update everyone about that. That's the main one that I'm in post on now, and then I'm sure I'll have announcements about my upcoming project soon. So
Sounds great. We're excited to see what comes next and we'll be watching. Thank you.
amazing. Thank you.